Carl Jung explained, 9 keys to elevate your worth in everyone's eyes. There is a moment in every human life when the mirror reflects back a stranger. You look into your own eyes and see someone you no longer recognize, not because you have changed, but because you have finally glimpsed what lies beneath the elaborate costume you have been wearing since childhood. This stranger staring back at you is your authentic self, and the shock of recognition comes not from its foreignness, but from its terrible, beautiful familiarity. Carl Jung understood this moment with the precision of a surgeon and the compassion of a mystic. He saw that we are all actors in a grand theatre, performing roles we never consciously chose, wearing masks so convincing that we forget they are not our true faces. He called this mask the persona, from the Latin word meaning through which the sound comes, the character through which we speak our lines in the human drama. But here lies the profound paradox that Jung illuminated with such devastating clarity. The very mask we wear to elevate our worth in the eyes of others becomes the prison that prevents them from seeing our true value. We polish our personas until they gleam with false perfection, yet wonder why our relationships feel hollow, why success tastes like ash, why the applause of others cannot fill the emptiness within. The persona begins its formation in the earliest moments of consciousness, when a child first learns that certain expressions bring approval while others bring rejection. Watch a toddler's face as they navigate their first social interactions. See how quickly they learn which smile opens doors, which voice tone soothes adults, which behaviors earn the precious currency of love and acceptance. In those tender moments, the soul begins its long journey into disguise. Layer by layer, the mask grows more elaborate. The good student learns to hide their confusion behind nodding comprehension. The dutiful child learns to bury their rebellion beneath compliance. The adolescent learns to mask their authentic desires with whatever the peer group deems acceptable. Each layer adds weight, adds distance between the true self and the world, until the original face becomes a distant memory, like sunlight glimpsed from the bottom of a deep well. Jung observed that the persona serves a vital function. It is not merely deception but protection, a necessary boundary between the vulnerable inner world and the often harsh outer reality. Like armor worn by medieval knights, the persona shields us from psychological wounds that might otherwise prove fatal. The sensitive child develops a tough exterior to survive the schoolyard. The wounded heart learns to present an invulnerable facade to avoid further betrayal. The dreamer learns to speak the language of practicality to function in a world that has little patience for visions. Yet Jung also saw the shadow side of this protective mechanism. The persona, originally formed to serve the self, gradually becomes the master. The actor forgets they are acting. The mask fuses with the face until removing it feels like tearing away flesh. We become so identified with our roles, the successful professional, the perfect parent, the spiritual seeker, the rebel, the helper, that we lose touch with the one who chose to play these parts. This identification with the persona creates what Jung called a fundamental split in consciousness. On one side stands the false self, polished and presentable, speaking the approved lines with practiced ease. On the other side, barely visible in the shadows, stands the authentic self, raw, vulnerable, imperfect, but radiating a truth that no mask can replicate. The tragedy is that in our desperate attempt to be worthy of love, we hide the very aspects of ourselves that are most lovable. Consider the exhaustion that comes from maintaining a perfect facade. Every interaction becomes a performance requiring energy, attention, and constant vigilance. Will the mask slip? Will someone see through the act? The persona demands feeding. It requires external validation to maintain its existence, like a vampire that must drain others' approval to survive. This creates an endless cycle of dependency, where our sense of worth becomes hostage to others' opinions, their moods, their momentary attention, or distraction. Jung understood that this persona identification is perhaps the most common form of psychological suffering in our time. We create elaborate personas designed to elevate our worth in others' eyes, yet the very act of hiding our authentic self sends an unconscious message that we are not worthy of love as we are. Others sense this inauthenticity even when they cannot name it. They may admire our achievements, envy our apparent confidence, or respect our social success, but they cannot connect with the person behind the mask because that person remains hidden even from themselves. The persona speaks in the language of should. I should be more successful. I should be happier. I should be stronger, wiser, more spiritual, more disciplined. This inner voice carries the weight of all our accumulated conditioning, all the messages we absorbed about who we needed to be to earn our place in the world. But Jung recognized that this voice, no matter how familiar, is not the voice of the true self. It is the voice of the collective, speaking through us, shaping us into acceptable forms that fit the molds society has prepared. There is a moment in psychological development that Jung called the crisis of meaning, when the persona that has served us for decades suddenly feels like a suffocating prison. This often occurs in midlife, though it can happen at any age when the soul rebels against the constraints of false identity. The successful executive finds themselves staring out the office window, wondering whose life they are living. The perfect mother discovers rage burning beneath her perpetual smile. The spiritual teacher confronts their shadow and realizes their wisdom has become another form of performance. This crisis, though painful, is actually a sacred invitation. It is the psyche's way of calling us home to ourselves, of demanding that we choose authenticity over acceptance, truth over comfort. Jung saw this not as breakdown but as breakthrough, the beginning of what he called individuation, the process of becoming who we truly are beneath all the layers of conditioning and expectation. The path beyond the persona requires immense courage, for it means disappointing others, risking rejection, and facing the terrifying possibility that we might not be lovable as we really are. It means admitting that the person we have presented to the world is not the whole truth, and perhaps not even a small part of it. It means grieving the false self we have invested so much energy in maintaining, like mourning the death of a character we have played for so long that losing them feels like losing ourselves. Yet Jung promised something extraordinary on the other side of this psychological death, the discovery that our authentic self possesses a magnetic quality that no persona can replicate. When we stop trying to be impressive and start being real, when we stop performing worthiness and start embodying it, something shifts in the field around us. Others sense our authenticity like a tuning fork responding to its perfect pitch. They are drawn not to our perfection, but to our humanity, not to our mask, but to the courage it takes to remove it. The paradox Jung revealed is this: the very vulnerabilities we hide behind our personas are often what make us most attractive to others. The flaws we cover with perfectionism, the fears we mask with false confidence, the longings we disguise with cynicism, these are the doorways through which real connection enters. When we allow others to see our struggles, our questions, our humanity, we give them permission to be human too. This creates a quality of relationship that persona-based interactions can never achieve. But the journey beyond the persona is not about abandoning all social roles or rejecting all forms of self-presentation. Jung understood that we need functional personas to navigate social reality, the professional self that shows up for work, the social self that engages appropriately in various contexts. The key is conscious relationship with these roles, remembering that they are costumes we wear rather than our true identity. The authentic self that emerges from behind the mask carries what Jung called numinous quality, a mysterious radiance that elevates not only our own worth, but awakens others to their inherent value. This is not the artificial glow of a polished persona, but the natural luminosity of a soul that has stopped hiding from itself. Such individuals possess a quality of presence that is both ordinary and extraordinary. They are fully human, yet in their humanity, they reveal something transcendent. As we stand at the threshold of this exploration into the depths of the psyche, we must remember that removing the mask is not a single dramatic gesture, but a gradual process of archaeological excavation. Layer by layer, we uncover what we have buried. Breath by breath, we learn to inhabit our own skin. Step by step, we discover that our true worth was never dependent on others' approval, but has been waiting within us all along, patient as bedrock, luminous as stars, real as the breath that moves through us in this very moment. The mask we wear is both our protection and our prison, our shield and our cage. Jung's great gift was showing us that we can honor the persona's service, while no longer being enslaved by it, that we can engage socially while remaining rooted in authenticity, that we can elevate our worth not by becoming someone else, but by becoming more fully ourselves. This is the first key to psychological freedom, recognizing the stranger in the mirror as both the false self we have created and the true self we have always been. In the basement of every human soul lives a prisoner we pretend does not exist. We have locked them away in the darkest corner of our psychological house, thrown away the key, and convinced ourselves that the occasional sounds echoing from below are merely the settling of old foundations. But Jung knew better. He understood that what we exile to the shadows does not disappear. It grows stronger in the darkness, feeding on our denial, waiting for the moment when it will demand recognition. This prisoner is our shadow, and it wears the face of everything we have decided we are not. It carries the rage we learned was unacceptable, the selfishness we were taught to suppress, the wildness we were conditioned to tame. It holds our primitive desires, our unflattering truths, our capacity for destruction and chaos. We have spent lifetimes building walls to keep it contained. Yet Jung whispered a secret that changes everything. The very qualities we have banished to the underworld of our psyche hold the keys to a magnetism that no amount of self-improvement can replicate. The shadow forms in the earliest moments of moral development, when a child first learns the devastating lesson that love is conditional. Watch the moment when a toddler's natural aggression is met with horror and rejection. See how quickly they learn to hide their anger behind sweetness, to bury their selfishness beneath compliance, to mask their primal nature with civilized behavior. In that moment of exile, a part of the soul goes underground, carrying with it not just darkness, but also vitality, authenticity, and raw life force. We are taught to believe that goodness means the absence of darkness, that spiritual development requires the elimination of our lower nature, that becoming worthy of love means amputating the parts of ourselves that others find disturbing. But Jung saw through this fundamental delusion. He recognized that what we call evil is often simply energy that has been split off and demonized, that our so-called negative qualities contain within them the very essence of what makes us dynamically alive. Consider the shadow of anger, that fierce energy we have been taught to fear and suppress. In its raw form, anger appears destructive, antisocial, something to be controlled and eventually eliminated. Yet when we trace anger to its source, we discover it is the guardian of our boundaries, the protector of our values, the fire that burns away what is false and preserves what is true. When anger is integrated rather than repressed, it becomes righteous passion, the fuel for positive change, the energy that refuses to accept what is unacceptable, or examine the shadow of selfishness, that grasping, self-centered quality we have learned to despise. In its unconscious form, selfishness appears greedy and narcissistic, concerned only with personal gain at others' expense. But Jung understood that healthy selfishness is actually self-respect, the capacity to honor our own needs and desires, the foundation upon which genuine generosity can be built. Those who have never learned to be appropriately selfish often give from emptiness rather than fullness, creating relationships based on depletion rather than abundance. The alchemists of old spoke of transforming lead into gold, but they were not speaking of literal metals. They were describing the psychological process Jung called shadow integration, the sacred work of reclaiming our disowned parts and discovering the treasure hidden within them. This is not about becoming our shadow or acting out every dark impulse, but about conscious relationship with the full spectrum of our humanity. The process begins with recognition, the terrifying and liberating moment when we acknowledge that the qualities we despise in others often live within us as well. Jung called this projection withdrawal, the painful process of taking back the disowned aspects of ourselves that we have cast onto other people. That person who irritates us with their arrogance, they mirror our own unacknowledged grandiosity. The individual we judge for their weakness, they reflect our own hidden vulnerability that we cannot bear to face. This recognition can feel like psychological death. The good person discovers their capacity for cruelty. The spiritual seeker confronts their materialism. The loving parent encounters their resentment. The helper faces their hidden neediness. It is as if the carefully constructed identity we have built our life around suddenly reveals itself to be a house of cards, collapsing to reveal the complex, contradictory being we have always been but never allowed ourselves to acknowledge. Yet in this apparent destruction lies the seed of rebirth. For when we stop pretending to be only good, we become authentically human. When we acknowledge our darkness, we can finally access our light, not the artificial illumination of forced positivity, but the natural radiance that emerges when all parts of the self are welcomed home. Jung understood that those who have done this shadow work possess a quality that is both disturbing and irresistible. They are no longer trying to be perfect, which paradoxically makes them more attractive than those who are. They have stopped pretending to be saints, which allows their genuine goodness to shine without the taint of manipulation or spiritual pride. They have befriended their darkness, which means they are no longer unconsciously controlled by it. This integration creates what Jung called the transcendent function, a bridge between conscious and unconscious, light and dark, acceptable and rejected. Those who have built this bridge within themselves become living examples of wholeness in a world full of fragmented people. They are safe to be around because they are not at war with themselves. They are attractive because they radiate the aliveness that comes from embracing the full spectrum of human experience. The shadow contains not only our darkness, but also our unlived light. The positive qualities we were taught were dangerous or inappropriate. The shadow of many women contains their power, aggression, and ambition, qualities that were deemed unfeminine and therefore exiled. The shadow of many men holds their vulnerability, intuition, and emotional sensitivity, aspects that were labeled weak and thus rejected. Reclaiming these disowned treasures often feels more threatening than facing our darkness, because it requires us to challenge not only personal conditioning, but cultural expectations. There is a particular magnetism that radiates from those who have integrated their shadow, a quality that draws others like moths to flame. It is not the desperate attractiveness of those trying to impress, nor the manipulative charm of those seeking to control. It is the natural magnetism of someone who is no longer hiding from themselves, who has space in their psyche for the full range of human experience, who can meet others' darkness without judgment because they have made peace with their own. This integration is not a one-time achievement, but an ongoing process, a daily practice of conscious relationship with the rejected aspects of ourselves. It requires the courage to feel what we have numbed, to acknowledge what we have denied, to love what we have hated. It means learning to dance with our devil rather than trying to destroy it, understanding that the energy we spend in warfare against ourselves is energy unavailable for creativity, love, and authentic contribution to the world. The alchemical transformation Jung described is not about becoming perfect, but about becoming whole. It is not about eliminating our darkness, but about illuminating it with consciousness. When we stop fighting the shadow and start relating to it with curiosity and compassion, something miraculous occurs. The very qualities that once seemed like obstacles to love become doorways to deeper intimacy. Those who have done this work become safe harbors for others who are struggling with their own rejected parts. They can witness others' anger without becoming reactive, meet others' sadness without trying to fix it, hold space for others' complexity without needing to simplify it. This capacity to be present with the full spectrum of human experience makes them naturally attractive to those who are tired of performing perfection and ready to explore the depths of their authentic selves. The shadow, Jung reminds us, is not our enemy but our teacher, not our weakness but our strength in disguise. It holds the missing pieces of our wholeness, the disowned aspects of our power, the rejected fragments of our authentic self. When we learn to dance with this inner devil, we discover that it has been our guardian angel all along, protecting our vitality from a world that would prefer us diminished, preserving our wildness in a culture that demands conformity, holding our authentic power in trust until we are ready to claim it consciously. This is the second key to psychological freedom and authentic magnetism, not the elimination of our darkness, but its integration, not the conquest of our shadow, but its transformation from enemy to ally. In befriending what we have rejected about ourselves, we become whole enough to attract others, not through manipulation or performance, but through the simple yet profound act of being courageously, completely human. Within the cathedral of every human soul, a wedding is waiting to take place. Not the union of two separate beings, but the sacred marriage of the eternal opposites that live within us. The masculine and feminine principles that Jung called the anima and animus. This is perhaps the most profound and transformative of all psychological integrations, for it holds the secret to becoming magnetically whole in a world fragmented by the illusion of separation. Jung gazed into the depths of the human psyche and saw what the ancients knew but modernity had forgotten, that each soul contains both bride and groom, both king and queen, both the penetrating fire of masculine consciousness and the receptive depths of feminine wisdom. These are not gender roles imposed by society, but archetypal forces that exist beyond the boundaries of biological sex, primordial energies that have been dancing together since the first spark of consciousness ignited in the cosmic darkness. The masculine principle within us carries the sword of discrimination, the power to focus and direct, to achieve and accomplish, to penetrate mystery with the blade of analysis. It is the part of us that rises with the sun, that builds structures and systems, that says I will and I can and I must. This inner masculine energy drives us toward goals, compels us to differentiate ourselves from others, pushes us to climb mountains both literal and metaphorical. Yet in its wounded or undeveloped state, this masculine principle becomes tyrannical, rigid, domineering. It loses touch with feeling and intuition, becoming so focused on achievement that it forgets the purpose behind the striving. It builds walls instead of bridges, creates hierarchies instead of harmony, mistakes conquest for connection. When the inner masculine is not balanced by its feminine counterpart, it produces individuals who are successful but hollow, accomplished but unloved, powerful but profoundly lonely. The feminine principle within us holds the chalice of receptivity, the power to receive and nurture, to intuit and create, to embrace mystery with the arms of acceptance. It is the part of us that moves with the moon's cycles, that flows like water around obstacles, that says, I feel and I know and I trust. This inner feminine energy connects us to the web of relationship, opens us to the voices of the unconscious, invites us to dance with the unknown rather than conquer it. But in its wounded or rejected state, this feminine principle becomes passive, chaotic, destructive. It loses its power to create boundaries, becoming so open that it has no container for its gifts. It drowns in emotion without the masculine's discriminating consciousness to provide clarity. It becomes the victim rather than the creator, the one who suffers rather than the one who transforms. When the inner feminine is not supported by its masculine counterpart, it produces individuals who are sensitive but weak, intuitive but ineffective, loving but unable to protect what they love. Jung understood that most people live in a state of inner civil war between these two principles, having been taught by culture and conditioning to identify with one while rejecting the other. Men are often encouraged to develop their masculine side while denying their feminine nature, creating individuals who are strong but brittle, focused but disconnected from their emotional depths. Women are frequently conditioned to embrace their feminine qualities while suppressing their masculine power, resulting in beings who are loving but unable to assert their will, intuitive but incapable of translating their visions into reality. This psychological splitting creates a profound sense of incompleteness that we unconsciously seek to heal through projection onto others. We fall in love with people who carry the disowned aspects of ourselves, hoping they will complete us from the outside what we have failed to integrate within. The overly masculine person seeks a partner who will provide the missing feminine qualities: sensitivity, intuition, emotional depth. The overly feminine individual pursues someone who embodies the rejected masculine traits: strength, direction, decisive action. But Jung revealed the devastating truth about this unconscious strategy. What we seek in others can never truly fulfill us until we have found it within ourselves. The external other may temporarily satisfy our sense of completion, but they inevitably disappoint us when they fail to perfectly embody our projected ideals. We demand that they be our missing half, then resent them when they prove to be whole human beings with their own shadows and limitations. The path to authentic wholeness requires a different kind of courage, the willingness to claim both our inner king and inner queen, to develop both our masculine focus and our feminine flow, to become internally complete rather than externally dependent. This is the sacred marriage Jung spoke of, the alchemical wedding that transforms us from fragmented beings seeking completion into integrated individuals capable of sharing our wholeness with others. This integration begins with recognition, the profound realization that we are not meant to be half persons seeking our other half, but whole beings capable of expressing the full spectrum of human qualities. It requires us to challenge the cultural conditioning that has taught us to identify with only one principle while rejecting the other. The man must learn to embrace his sensitivity without losing his strength. The woman must claim her power without abandoning her receptivity. The process is often disorienting and sometimes painful, for it requires us to expand our identity beyond the familiar boundaries of gender role and social expectation. The successful businessman discovers his need for creative expression and emotional intimacy. The nurturing mother awakens to her ambition and desire for independence. The spiritual seeker realizes their longing for worldly engagement and material success. Each expansion of identity feels like a small death of who we thought we were, followed by a rebirth into who we are becoming. Yet those who undertake this inner marriage begin to radiate a quality that is both mysterious and magnetic. They are no longer desperately seeking completion from others because they have found it within themselves. They are no longer trying to be half of something, but are learning to be whole in their own right. This wholeness creates a kind of psychological gravitational field that draws others who are ready for authentic relationship rather than codependent merger. The integrated individual can love without losing themselves, can give without depleting. Their resources can receive without becoming dependent. They bring to relationships the fullness of their being rather than the emptiness of their need. They are attracted to others not because they need them to complete them, but because they choose to share their completeness with another complete being. This inner marriage also transforms our relationship with creativity and manifestation. When masculine focus unites with feminine receptivity, we become capable of both receiving inspired visions and translating them into concrete reality. We can dream and build, intuit and analyze, flow and direct. We become conduits through which the creative force of the universe can express itself in balanced, sustainable ways. The sacred marriage is not a one-time event, but an ongoing process of conscious relationship between these inner principles. It requires daily attention to both aspects of our nature, refusing to favor one over the other. It means learning to be assertive without being aggressive, receptive without being passive, strong without being rigid, soft without being weak. Jung observed that individuals who have achieved this integration often become teachers and healers, not through any conscious intention, but through the simple fact of their wholeness. They provide a living example of what it means to be complete, to embody both strength and sensitivity, power and wisdom, focus and flow. In their presence, others remember their own forgotten wholeness and are inspired to begin their own journey toward integration. The anima and animus are not abstract concepts, but living forces within the psyche, archetypal energies that can be felt and experienced directly. When we learn to dialogue with these inner figures, to honor their gifts and heal their wounds, we discover that they are not obstacles to overcome, but allies to embrace. They are the internal lovers whose union creates the child of our authentic self, the sacred marriage that births our true identity. In a world that profits from our fragmentation, that sells us products to fill the void created by our inner splitting, the sacred marriage becomes a radical act of rebellion. To become whole is to refuse the consumer culture's promise that happiness lies in external acquisition. To integrate our opposites is to stop seeking in others what we have failed to develop in ourselves. To marry our inner masculine and feminine is to discover that we are already complete, already worthy, already capable of the love and success we have been seeking outside ourselves. This is the third key to psychological freedom and magnetic presence, not the dominance of one principle over another, but their sacred union in the temple of consciousness. When we stop being at war with ourselves, when we cease trying to be half of something and start being whole in our own right, we radiate a completeness that attracts others, not because they need us, but because they are inspired by our wholeness to discover their own. The sacred marriage awaits within each of us, patient as eternity, promising as dawn. It is the union that creates not children of flesh, but children of spirit, not external offspring, but internal offspring, the birth of our authentic self from the marriage of our inner opposites. In this wedding, we become both bride and groom, both lover and beloved, both the seeker and the sought, discovering that what we have been searching for across the world has been living within us all along. There is a throne in the center of consciousness, and upon it sits a pretender to the crown. This false king calls itself the ego, and it rules with the desperate authority of one who knows its reign is built on borrowed power. It demands tribute from every experience, claiming credit for every success, defending its territory with the ferocity of a cornered animal. Yet Jung saw through this elaborate deception to the profound truth beneath. The ego is not the true ruler of the psyche, but a necessary servant that has forgotten its proper place. The ego emerges in the dawn of individual consciousness like a sun rising from the oceanic depths of the unconscious. In the beginning, this emergence is miraculous, the birth of I from the primordial we, the first glimmer of separate identity in the vast matrix of being. The infant discovers the boundary between self and world, between me and not me. And with this discovery comes the intoxicating power of individual will. I want. I choose. I am. This early ego formation is not only natural, but essential. Without it, we would remain forever dissolved in the unconscious, unable to function in the world, incapable of directed action or conscious choice. The ego serves as the executive function of consciousness, the organizing principle that allows us to navigate reality, make decisions, and relate to others as separate beings. It is the ego that gets us to work on time, that remembers our responsibilities, that maintains the coherent sense of identity necessary for social functioning. But like all psychological functions, the ego carries within it the seeds of its own pathology. What begins as a healthy sense of individual identity can become a tyrannical inflation, a false kingship that mistakes itself for the totality of the self. The ego, originally formed to serve the wholeness of the personality, gradually becomes convinced that it is the whole personality, that its narrow perspective encompasses the entire scope of human experience. Jung called this condition ego inflation, and he recognized it as one of the most common forms of psychological suffering in our achievement-oriented culture. The inflated ego is like a balloon that has been filled with too much air, impressive to look at but dangerously close to bursting. It demands constant validation to maintain its inflated state, feeding on praise, accomplishment, and the admiration of others like a vampire that must drain external sources to survive. Watch the ego-inflated person enter a room. They carry themselves with a studied importance, their presence demanding attention and recognition. They speak of their achievements with barely concealed pride, their conversation inevitably returning to their own significance. They cannot bear to be ignored, overlooked, or contradicted, for such experiences threaten the very foundation of their inflated self-image. They have become addicted to the drug of importance, and like all addicts, they need ever-increasing doses to achieve the same high. This inflation creates a peculiar kind of repulsion in others, though few can name exactly what they find off-putting. On the surface, the ego-inflated person may appear successful, confident, even charismatic. But beneath the polished exterior lies a desperate neediness that others sense instinctively. The very effort to appear impressive betrays the underlying insecurity. The demand for validation reveals the absence of genuine self-worth. The claim to superiority unconsciously communicates feelings of inferiority. Jung understood that ego inflation is actually a defense against the opposite extreme, the terror of being nobody, of having no significance, of dissolving back into the undifferentiated mass from which we emerged. The inflated ego is like a child whistling in the dark, creating noise to drown out the silence it fears. It builds monuments to its own importance because it cannot bear the possibility that it might not matter at all. Yet this defensive strategy creates the very rejection it seeks to avoid. Others are repelled by ego inflation not because they are jealous of the person's success, but because they can sense the underlying desperation. The inflated ego is like a black hole that sucks energy from every interaction, leaving others feeling drained and diminished. It cannot give genuine attention because it is too busy seeking attention. It cannot offer real presence because it is too concerned with making an impression. The path beyond ego inflation requires what Jung called ego death, not the literal death of the ego, but its symbolic crucifixion and resurrection. This is perhaps the most challenging of all psychological transformations, because it requires us to voluntarily relinquish the very thing we believe is keeping us alive. It means allowing the false king to die so that the true self can be born. This process often begins with what Jung termed the crisis of meaning, a moment when the ego's achievements suddenly feel hollow, when success tastes like ashes, when the applause of others no longer satisfies the deep hunger within. The successful executive stares at their corner office and wonders why they feel so empty. The acclaimed artist realizes that fame has not filled the void they thought it would. The spiritual teacher confronts the ways they have used enlightenment as another form of ego enhancement. The ego death that follows is not a gentle transition, but a psychological crucifixion. Everything the ego has used to define itself, achievements, roles, relationships, beliefs, must be surrendered. The false king must step down from the throne, admitting that it never truly belonged there. This feels like annihilation because the ego has been so identified with its own importance that it cannot imagine existence without it. But Jung knew that this death is not an ending but a transformation. In the depths of ego dissolution, something else begins to emerge. Not the grandiose false self, but the authentic self, the true center of the personality that has been waiting patiently beneath the ego's noisy claims to importance. This self does not need to prove its worth because it knows its worth is inherent. It does not demand validation because it is already valid. It does not seek to impress because it is already impressive in its simple authenticity. The individual who has undergone this ego death and rebirth radiates a different quality entirely. They possess what Jung called natural authority, not the forced dominance of the inflated ego, but the quiet sovereignty of one who has found their true center. They command respect, not by demanding it, but by embodying it. They attract others, not through manipulation or performance, but through the simple magnetism of authentic presence. This transformation is paradoxical in the extreme. By dying to the ego's claims of importance, the person discovers their actual importance. By surrendering the need to be special, they become genuinely special. By letting go of the desperate grab for significance, they find their true significance. It is as if the ego's death creates space for something far more powerful to emerge. The self that needs no proof of its worth, because it is worth incarnate. The integrated individual no longer needs to be the center of attention because they have found their own center. They can celebrate others' successes without feeling diminished because their worth is not dependent on comparison. They can admit their mistakes without shame because their identity is not built on the illusion of perfection. They can be present with others because they are not constantly calculating how to make themselves look good. This ego transcendence does not mean the elimination of the ego, but its right relationship to the larger self. The ego remains as a necessary function, the part of us that interfaces with the world, that makes practical decisions, that maintains our individual identity. But it no longer pretends to be the whole show. It has learned to serve rather than rule, to function rather than dominate, to be a faithful servant of the deeper self rather than a tyrannical master. Jung observed that societies often reward ego inflation while punishing ego transcendence. We live in a culture that celebrates the loudest voice, the most aggressive self-promotion, the most inflated claims to importance. Yet paradoxically, the individuals who achieve lasting influence and genuine respect are often those who have moved beyond the ego's desperate need for validation. They attract followers not because they demand attention, but because they embody a quality of presence that others long to experience. The crucifixion of the ego is not a punishment, but a liberation. It is the death of the false self that allows the true self to be born. It is the surrender of artificial importance that reveals inherent significance. It is the end of the desperate performance that allows authentic being to emerge. In this death, we discover that what we thought was our identity was merely a costume we were wearing, and what we thought was our strength was actually our greatest weakness. Those who have undergone this transformation become living examples of what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming who we truly are beneath all the layers of ego identification. They are no longer trying to be someone else's version of success, but are learning to be their own version of authentic. They have stopped competing with others because they have found their unique place in the cosmic order. They no longer need to prove their worth because they have discovered it was never in question. The golden child's burden is the weight of false importance, the exhausting effort to maintain an inflated self-image, the constant fear that others will discover we are not as special as we pretend to be. But when we allow this burden to be lifted, when we consent to the ego's death and rebirth, we discover that what we thought was our greatest strength, our ability to appear important, was actually our greatest weakness. And what we thought was our greatest weakness, our ordinary humanity, is actually our greatest strength. This is the fourth key to psychological freedom and magnetic presence, the courage to let the false king die so that the true self can reign, the willingness to surrender artificial importance for authentic significance, the recognition that our deepest power comes not from inflating ourselves, but from discovering who we truly are beneath all inflation. In this death and rebirth, we find not the importance we thought we needed, but the significance we always possessed. There is a moment in the deepening of consciousness when the soul recognizes a startling truth. The world we have been seeing is not the world that is, but the world as we are. This recognition arrives like lightning in the darkness of our assumptions, illuminating the vast landscape of projection that has shaped every relationship, every attraction, every repulsion we have ever experienced. You have been walking through a hall of mirrors your entire life, beloved soul. Though you believed you were walking through reality itself, each person you encounter becomes a silvered surface, reflecting back the unacknowledged aspects of your own psyche, the radiant qualities you have disowned, the shadow territories you have refused to claim, the archetypal energies you have projected onto others rather than recognizing as your own. Jung understood this mystery with the precision of a mystic and the clarity of a scientist. Projection, he revealed, is the unconscious mechanism by which we populate our external world with the contents of our internal world. We cast our unlived life, our unintegrated aspects, our denied magnificence, and our rejected darkness onto the screen of other souls, then react to these projections as if they were objective reality. Consider the magnetism you feel towards certain individuals, that inexplicable pull that seems to arise from some deeper source than conscious choice. What you are experiencing is not their inherent power, but the power of your own projected contents calling to you from across the divide of unconscious separation. The qualities that mesmerize you in another are the very qualities that lie dormant within your own soul, waiting for recognition and integration. The woman who appears to embody perfect wisdom, the man who seems to carry natural authority, the friend whose creativity feels like magic. These are not separate beings possessing what you lack. They are mirrors reflecting back the undeveloped potentials within your own psyche, the archetypal energies that seek expression through your unique vessel of consciousness. But projection operates in both directions, beloved seeker. Just as you see your unlived magnificence in others, you also encounter your rejected shadow projected onto those who trigger your strongest reactions of aversion, judgment, or fear. The colleague whose arrogance infuriates you, the acquaintance whose neediness repels you, the stranger whose behavior seems intolerable, these too are mirrors, reflecting back the aspects of your own nature that you have banished from conscious awareness. This is the profound democracy of the unconscious. Every strong emotional reaction, whether attraction or repulsion, points back to some aspect of your own psyche seeking acknowledgement. The intensity of your response is directly proportional to the strength of the projection. the degree to which you have disowned some part of your own nature and cast it onto the external world. The transformation begins when you develop the courage to withdraw these projections, to recognize that every person who has ever triggered a strong response in you has been serving as a teacher, showing you some aspect of your own soul that you have not yet claimed. This is not a comfortable recognition, for it requires you to abandon the familiar position of victim or judge and step into the more challenging role of conscious creator. When you begin to reclaim your projections, the world around you starts to shift in ways that can feel both liberating and disorienting. The people you once idealized begin to appear more human, more flawed, more real. The individuals you once demonized begin to reveal their own humanity, their own struggles, their own light struggling to emerge from shadow. This is not disillusionment, but true illumination, the recognition of the shared humanity that connects all souls in their journey toward wholeness. The process of withdrawing projections is an act of profound psychological courage. It means looking at the person who triggers your strongest judgment and asking, what aspect of my own nature am I seeing reflected here? What quality am I refusing to acknowledge in myself? It means examining your heroes and mentors and asking, what power am I giving away to them that rightfully belongs to my own developing consciousness? This inner work transforms you from a reactive being into a responsible one. When you understand that your emotional reactions are information about your own psyche rather than objective truths about others, you gain the freedom to choose your responses rather than being driven by unconscious compulsions. You become capable of seeing others more clearly, not through the distorting lens of projection, but through the clear vision of integrated consciousness. The shadow projections are often the most challenging to reclaim, for they ask you to acknowledge the very qualities you have spent a lifetime trying to prove you do not possess. The cruelty you see in others may reflect your own capacity for hardness. The selfishness that disgusts you may mirror your own unacknowledged self-centeredness. The weakness you despise may point to your own areas of vulnerability that you have, armored against recognition. Yet this reclaiming of shadow projections is perhaps the most liberating work you can undertake. When you acknowledge that you carry within yourself the full spectrum of human possibility, both light and dark, both noble and base, you free yourself from the exhausting effort of maintaining a false persona. You discover that your humanity is not diminished by the acknowledgement of your shadow, but expanded by the integration of your wholeness. The positive projections require a different kind of courage, the courage to claim your own power, your own wisdom, your own creative potential. It is often easier to remain small and admire others from a distance than to step into the fullness of your own capabilities. But every time you project your power onto another, you diminish your own capacity for growth and self-actualization. Watch how this operates in your closest relationships. The partner onto whom you project perfect understanding, the friend who seems to hold all the answers you seek, the teacher who appears to possess the wisdom you long for. These projections create a fundamental imbalance that prevents authentic intimacy. True relationship becomes possible only when you see others as they are, not as repositories for your unlived potentials. As you develop the skill of recognizing and withdrawing projections, you begin to understand that every encounter is an opportunity for self-discovery. The rude clerk who ruins your morning is showing you something about your own impatience or your attachment to being treated with deference. The inspiring speaker who moves you to tears is reflecting back your own capacity for eloquence and impact. The difficult family member who pushes all your buttons is revealing the very buttons that need to be understood and integrated. This recognition transforms your relationship to conflict and challenge. Instead of seeing difficult people as obstacles to your peace, you begin to recognize them as messengers from your own unconscious, bringing important information about the areas where you still need to grow. This doesn't mean becoming passive or accepting harmful behavior, but rather approaching challenging situations with the curiosity of a researcher and the wisdom of a soul committed to its own evolution. The collective dimension of projection reveals itself as you begin to understand how entire cultures, nations, and groups project their shadows onto other groups. The same mechanism that operates in personal relationships plays out on the grand stage of human history. The enemy nation that embodies all evil, the social group that represents everything wrong with society, the political ideology that seems to threaten everything good. These too are often projections of the collective shadow, the disowned aspects of the larger psyche seeking recognition and integration. Understanding projection at this collective level brings both humility and hope. Humility because it reveals how much of what we take to be objective reality is actually the externalization of our internal processes. Hope because it suggests that the conflicts that seem intractable on the surface might be resolved through the deeper work of projection, withdrawal, and shadow integration. In your personal journey, this understanding brings a profound shift in how you navigate relationships. You begin to see that your task is not to find the perfect partner, friend, or community, but to become increasingly conscious of your own projective processes. You start to ask different questions. What is this relationship teaching me about myself? What aspect of my own nature is being reflected back to me? How can I use this interaction as an opportunity for greater self-awareness? The magnetism that draws you to certain individuals begins to be understood not as fate or chemistry, but as the pull of your own unlived potentials seeking expression. The repulsion you feel toward others is recognized not as justified judgment, but as the defensive reaction of the ego protecting itself from confronting its own rejected aspects. This shift in understanding transforms you from someone who seeks validation and completion from others into someone who uses relationships as vehicles for self-discovery and mutual growth. You no longer need others to be perfect or to fulfill your projections. Instead, you can appreciate them for who they are while taking responsibility for your own development and wholeness. The journey of withdrawing projections is not about becoming isolated or disconnected from others. Rather, it leads to deeper, more authentic connections based on seeing and accepting both yourself and others as complex, evolving beings on the path of individuation. When you stop projecting your unlived life onto others, you free both yourself and them to be more fully who you are. This work requires patience and compassion, for the ego does not easily surrender its familiar patterns of projection. It feels safer to see your power in others, your shadow in enemies, your potential in heroes. Taking responsibility for the full spectrum of your own psyche can feel overwhelming at first, but with each projection you withdraw, each disowned aspect you reclaim, you become more whole, more authentic, more capable of genuine relationship. The ultimate recognition that emerges from this work is that you are not separate from the world. You perceive but intimately connected to it through the very mechanism of projection. The external world is not simply out there, but is partially created by the contents of your own psyche. This understanding brings both great responsibility and great possibility. Responsibility because it means you are always to some degree creating your own experience. Possibility because it means you have more power to transform your experience than you might have imagined. As you continue this journey of recognizing and withdrawing projections, you discover that the work is never complete. New projections emerge as you encounter new people and situations. But each cycle of projection and withdrawal deepens your self-knowledge and increases your capacity for conscious relationship. You become someone who can see clearly, respond wisely, and love authentically, not because you have transcended the human condition, but because you have learned to work consciously with its fundamental mechanisms. The soul that understands projection becomes a soul that can navigate the world with greater wisdom and compassion. You no longer react automatically to the triggers and magnets that once controlled your emotional life. Instead, you respond from a place of integrated consciousness, seeing both the other and yourself, with the clear vision that comes from owning your full humanity. This is the gift of psychological ownership, the transformation from reactive being to response-able creator. In claiming your projections, you claim your power. In recognizing your mirrors, you recognize your wholeness. In understanding that the world is as you are, you gain the ability to transform both yourself and your experience of the world through the deep work of conscious relationship with your own soul. There comes a time in every soul's journey when the familiar ground beneath your feet begins to crumble, when the carefully constructed edifice of your identity starts to dissolve like salt in water. This is not the end of your story, beloved traveler, but the beginning of your truest chapter, the descent into the underworld of your own psyche, where death and rebirth dance together in the sacred darkness of transformation. The ancient alchemists called this phase the nigredo, the blackening, the necessary dissolution that precedes all authentic renewal. Jung recognized it as the night sea journey, that mythic passage through the belly of the whale, through the realm of shadows and forgotten truths, where the soul must travel alone to discover what cannot be found in the bright territories of conscious awareness. This descent is not chosen lightly, nor does it announce itself with fanfare. It arrives often uninvited, through loss that strips away your certainties, through failure that humbles your ambitions, through crisis that reveals the inadequacy of your previous strategies for living. The comfortable persona you have worn like armor suddenly feels foreign against your skin. The roles that once defined you, successful professional, devoted partner, responsible parent, begin to feel like costumes that no longer fit the shape of your evolving soul. In this dissolution, you may feel as though you are losing yourself entirely, as though the very foundations of your identity are being pulled away like stones from a crumbling wall. The ego, that faithful guardian of your constructed self, fights desperately against this unraveling, grasping for familiar patterns, reaching for the security of known identities. But the soul has begun a process that cannot be reversed. The breakdown of what you thought you were to make space for what you are becoming. This is the voluntary death that Jung spoke of, though it rarely feels voluntary in the moment of its arrival. It is the ego's surrender to something larger than itself, the recognition that the small self you have been must die for the greater self to be born. Like the seed that must rot in the dark earth before it can sprout toward the light, your false identities must decompose in the fertile darkness of the unconscious before your authentic nature can emerge. The underworld of your psyche is not a place of punishment, but a realm of profound initiation. Here, in the depths where your rejected aspects have been dwelling, you encounter the shadow materials that your conscious mind has spent years trying to avoid. The anger you have never allowed yourself to feel, the grief you have kept carefully contained, the wild creative forces you have domesticated into respectability, all of these emerge from their exile to be witnessed, acknowledged, and ultimately integrated. In this darkness you meet the parts of yourself that your persona has been constructed to hide. The vulnerable child who still fears abandonment, the fierce warrior who has been suppressed by social conditioning, the wise elder who has been ignored in favor of youthful ambition. These archetypal energies rise from the depths of your being, demanding recognition and integration. They are not invaders, but exiled aspects of your own wholeness, returning home to claim their rightful place in the constellation of your complete self. The journey through your personal underworld strips away the layers of conditioning, expectation, and adaptation that have accumulated over years of trying to fit into a world that often demands conformity over authenticity. Each layer that falls away may feel like a small death, The death of the people-pleaser, the death of the perfectionist, the death of the one who always has the right answer. But beneath these deaths lies something indestructible, something that cannot be diminished by loss or failure or the opinions of others. This is the paradox of the night sea journey. In losing yourself, you find yourself. In dying to who you thought you were, you discover who you have always been. The dissolution that feels like destruction is actually revelation, the stripping away of the false to reveal the true, like a sculptor removing marble to reveal the statue that was always present within the stone. This process removes what is not essential to reveal what is eternal. The darkness of this journey is not empty but full of the unlived potentials that have been waiting in the shadows, full of the creative energies that have been suppressed by convention, full of the authentic power that has been hidden beneath layers of societal conditioning. In the depths of your psyche, you discover resources you never knew you possessed, strengths that only emerge when everything else has been stripped away. Those who have navigated their inner darkness understand that this journey cannot be rushed or bypassed. The temptation to escape back to the surface, to grasp for the familiar identities that once provided security, is strong. But the soul that has begun this descent knows that the only way out is through, that the treasures of authentic selfhood can only be found by traveling to the very bottom of your personal abyss. The underworld teaches you to sit with uncertainty, to be present with discomfort, to find stability in the midst of dissolution. You learn that you are not the roles you play, not the achievements you accumulate, not the relationships that define you from the outside. You discover that your essential self is something far more vast and mysterious than any identity the ego could construct, something that exists independent of external validation or circumstance. In this realm of symbolic death, you encounter the great themes that have shaped human consciousness since the beginning of time. You walk with Inanna as she hangs on the hook in the underworld, stripped of all her powers and possessions. You journey with Persephone into the realm of Hades, learning that some wisdom can only be gained through direct experience of the depths. You accompany Jonah into the belly of the whale, discovering that what appears to be destruction is actually gestation. The mythic dimension of your journey reveals itself as you recognize that your personal descent is part of a larger pattern, an archetypal process that connects you to the deepest currents of human experience. You are not alone in your darkness, but part of an ancient tradition of souls who have made this journey from death to rebirth, from dissolution to integration, from false self to authentic being. As you travel deeper into your personal underworld, you begin to understand that every crisis in your life has been preparing you for this moment. Every loss that taught you resilience, every failure that revealed your strength, every moment of despair that forced you to discover resources you didn't know you possessed. The challenges that once seemed random or cruel reveal themselves as necessary initiations, preparing your psyche for the profound transformation that only comes through voluntary surrender to the unknown. The darkness begins to feel less like an enemy and more like an ally, less like a place of punishment and more like a sanctuary of truth. In the depths of your own being, you find a silence that is not empty, but pregnant with possibility, a void that is not absence, but the fullness of potential waiting to be born. This is the fertile darkness of the womb, the creative void from which all new life emerges. Your relationship to suffering begins to transform during this journey. What once felt like meaningless pain begins to reveal itself as purposeful difficulty, the necessary pressure that transforms coal into diamond, the sacred friction that polishes the soul until it shines with its own inner light. You learn to distinguish between the suffering that comes from resistance to life and the suffering that comes from alignment with your deepest truth, the difference between neurotic pain and sacred pain. The Negredo phase teaches you that strength is not found in avoiding difficulty, but in developing the capacity to remain present with whatever arises. True resilience is not the ability to bounce back unchanged, but the willingness to be transformed by your encounters with the depths. You discover that your greatest power lies not in your ability to control circumstances, but in your capacity to meet whatever comes with an open heart and a courageous spirit. As you navigate the labyrinth of your own psyche, you begin to understand that this journey is not about fixing what is broken, but about discovering what was never broken, the essential self that remains whole, regardless of what storms may rage on the surface of your life. This core self is like a diamond in the earth, waiting to be discovered beneath layers of accumulated experience and conditioning. The voluntary death of the ego is not a one-time event, but a recurring theme in the life of anyone committed to authentic growth. Each time you face a significant transition, each time you are called to grow beyond your current limitations, you must be willing to let some aspect of your familiar self die to make room for what wants to emerge. This becomes easier with practice, as you learn to trust the process of dissolution and renewal. Those who have made this journey carry a particular quality of presence, a depth that comes from having touched the bedrock of their own being, an authenticity that makes superficial interactions feel impossible and meaningful connections inevitable. They move through the world with the quiet confidence of someone who has faced their deepest fears and discovered that they contain treasures rather than terrors. The emergence from the underworld is not a return to where you began, but an arrival at a place you have never been, the place of integrated wholeness, where all aspects of your being are acknowledged and honored. You bring back from the depths the wisdom that can only be gained through direct experience of your own darkness, the compassion that comes from having encountered your own shadow, the strength that emerges from having survived the dissolution of everything you thought you were. This is the gift of the night sea journey. Not just personal transformation, but the capacity to serve as a guide for others who must make their own descent. Having navigated your own underworld, you become a beacon for those still lost in the darkness, a living testament to the possibility of renewal that awaits on the other side of voluntary death. The journey continues. For the soul that has tasted the depths is forever changed, forever capable of finding meaning in the darkness, forever able to trust in the transformative power of dissolution and renewal. You carry within you the knowledge that no external loss can diminish your essential worth, that no crisis can destroy what is truly yours, that every ending contains within it the seeds of a new beginning. In the depths of every human soul lies a sacred wound, a place where life has broken us open, where pain has carved caverns that seem too deep to heal, where suffering has left scars that mark us as irreparably damaged. Yet Jung glimpsed a mystery that transforms our understanding of these wounds entirely. What breaks us can also make us, what damages us can also bless us, and what we believe disqualifies us from love may be precisely what qualifies us to give it. This is the archetype of the wounded healer, and it dwells within every soul that has been touched by genuine suffering. It is the part of us that has been to hell and back, that has walked through the valley of the shadow and emerged not unscathed but transformed. The wounded healer carries their scars not as badges of shame, but as credentials of compassion, not as evidence of weakness, but as proof of strength that has been tested in the crucible of pain. The wounded healer emerges from the recognition that suffering is not an accident or aberration in human existence, but an integral part of the soul's curriculum. Every wound we receive is also a teacher, every trauma a disguised initiation, every breaking open a potential breaking through. The question is not whether we will be wounded, for life guarantees that we will, but whether we will allow our wounds to close us down or break us open, whether we will let our pain make us bitter or better, whether we will transform our suffering into wisdom or let it transform us into victims. Jung understood that there are two kinds of wounded people in the world: those who spread their unhealed wounds like infections, unconsciously harming others from their own place of unresolved pain, and those who have alchemized their suffering into medicine, who have transformed their personal wounds into universal healing. The difference between these two is not the presence or absence of wounding. Both have been deeply hurt. The difference is consciousness, the willingness to face the wound rather than flee from it, to feel it fully rather than numb it, to learn from it rather than simply endure it. The path of the wounded healer begins with the radical acceptance of our imperfection, our brokenness, our fundamental human fragility. This is perhaps the most difficult initiation of all, for it requires us to abandon the fantasy that we can go through life unscathed, that we can love without loss, that we can open our hearts without risking their breaking. The wounded healer has learned that invulnerability is not strength but weakness, that the attempt to avoid all pain only creates greater suffering, that our scars are not evidence of failure, but proof that we have lived fully enough to be wounded. This acceptance does not come easily. There is a part of us that wants to hide our wounds, to present a perfect facade to the world, to pretend that we have our lives completely together. We fear that if others see our brokenness, they will reject us, abandon us, or lose respect for us. We have been taught to see wounds as weaknesses, scars as shameful and emotional pain, as something to be quickly fixed or forgotten. But the wounded healer discovers something extraordinary. It is precisely our willingness to be vulnerable about our wounds that creates the deepest connections with others. When we stop pretending to be perfect and start being real, when we share our struggles alongside our strengths, when we allow others to see us in our full humanity, wounded but healing, broken but mending, scarred but still standing, we create a magnetic field of authenticity that draws others like nothing else can. This magnetism is not the artificial attraction created by performance or manipulation, but the natural gravitational pull of genuine human connection. Others are drawn to the wounded healer not because they appear to have all the answers, but because they are courageously living the questions, not because they have transcended human suffering, but because they have learned to dance with it, not because they are invulnerable, but because they have transformed their vulnerability into strength. The wounded healer becomes a safe harbor for other wounded souls precisely because they have navigated their own storms. They can sit with others' pain without trying to fix it, because they have learned to sit with their own. They can witness suffering without being overwhelmed by it, because they have developed the capacity to hold space for difficult emotions. They can offer hope to those in despair, because they have found light in their own darkness. This is not about wallowing in victimhood or using our wounds to manipulate others' sympathy. The wounded healer has moved beyond the victim identity into what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold opposites together, to be both wounded and healing, both broken and whole, both student and teacher. They have learned to speak from their scars without being defined by them, to share their struggles without making them the center of every conversation, to offer their pain as medicine without poisoning others with their bitterness. The transformation from wounded victim to wounded healer is an alchemical process that requires time, patience, and tremendous courage. It involves descending into the wound rather than escaping from it, feeling the full depth of our pain rather than numbing it, extracting the wisdom hidden within our suffering rather than simply trying to forget it ever happened. This is the work of what the alchemist called the nigredo, the blackening phase where we must sit in the darkness of our pain until it transforms into light. Jung observed that the wounded healer often experiences what he called the divine wound, a suffering so profound that it shatters our ordinary understanding of life and forces us to discover resources within ourselves we never knew existed. This might be the loss of a loved one that breaks our heart open to universal compassion, the experience of betrayal that teaches us the depths of forgiveness, the encounter with our own mortality that awakens us to the preciousness of each moment. These divine wounds are not punishments but invitations, calls from the soul to descend into the depths where our greatest treasures lie buried. They strip away our illusions about how life should be and force us to engage with life as it actually is. They shatter our personas and demand that we find our authentic selves. They dissolve our ego's pretensions and reveal the true self that has been waiting beneath all our careful constructions. The wounded healer learns to see their scars as sacred tattoos, each one telling a story of survival, resilience, and transformation. They understand that their wounds have carved hollow places within them, not empty spaces but sacred chambers where others' pain can be held and transformed. They become human chalices, containers for the suffering of the world, alchemical vessels where the lead of pain is transformed into the gold of wisdom. This transformation creates a unique form of authority, not the artificial authority of those who pretend to have never been wounded, but the authentic authority of those who have walked through fire and emerged, transformed. Others trust the wounded healer because they sense that this person has earned their wisdom through lived experience, that their insights come not from books or theories, but from the university of suffering. The wounded healer also understands something that the unwounded cannot, that healing is not about returning to some previous state of wholeness, but about integrating our brokenness into a new form of completeness. They know that the goal is not to eliminate all scars, but to transform them from sources of shame into sources of strength, not to pretend the wounding never happened, but to allow it to become part of their unique gift to the world. In a culture that worships perfection and fears imperfection, the wounded healer represents a radical alternative: the beauty of brokenness, the strength of vulnerability, the power of authentic human connection. They remind us that we are not meant to be invulnerable gods, but vulnerable humans, that our wounds do not disqualify us from love, but uniquely qualify us to give and receive it, that our imperfections are not obstacles to overcome but gifts to embrace. The wounded healer's magnetism comes from their capacity to make others feel less alone in their own wounds. In their presence, others can drop the exhausting pretense of having it all together. They can admit their struggles without fear of judgment. They can be human without apology. This creates relationships of extraordinary depth and authenticity, connections that nourish the soul rather than drain it. Jung knew that the wounded healer is not a role we choose, but a calling that chooses us through our suffering. We become wounded healers not because we seek out pain, but because we refuse to waste the pain that finds us. We transform our wounds into wisdom, not because we are masochistic, but because we are alchemical, capable of taking the raw material of suffering and creating something beautiful, meaningful, and healing from it. This is the seventh key to psychological freedom and magnetic presence: the recognition that our wounds, when consciously integrated, become our greatest gifts to the world. When we stop hiding our scars and start sharing our stories, when we transform our personal pain into universal medicine, when we become safe harbors for other wounded souls, we discover a form of attractiveness that transcends physical beauty or social success. The irresistible magnetism of someone who has been broken and chose to heal, who has suffered and chose to transform that suffering into service. The wounded healer stands as living proof that our worst experiences can become our greatest teachers, that our deepest wounds can become our most powerful medicine, that what we thought would destroy us can actually become what saves not only us, but others who are walking similar paths. In embracing the archetype of the wounded healer, we discover that our imperfections are not flaws to hide, but features to celebrate, not weaknesses to overcome, but strengths to share, not reasons for shame, but sources of the deepest human connection possible. Each night, as consciousness surrenders to the vast ocean of sleep, Your soul begins to speak in a language older than words, more truthful than daylight discourse, more revealing than any conversation you have ever had with another human being. These nocturnal messages, these dreams that arrive unbidden from the depths of your psyche, are not random firings of neural networks, but carefully crafted communications from your unconscious self. Letters written in the symbolic script of the soul, waiting to be decoded by the conscious mind willing to learn their ancient alphabet. Jung understood what the modern world had forgotten, that dreams are the royal road to the unconscious, the primary pathway through which the deeper wisdom of your being attempts to guide, warn, heal, and transform your conscious existence. In the theater of sleep, your psyche stages elaborate productions, casting archetypal figures in symbolic dramas that reveal the hidden dynamics governing your relationships, your self-worth, your authentic power, and your unrealized potential. But these messages do not arrive in the clear prose of conscious thought. They speak in the language of symbol and metaphor, paradox and poetry, myth and mystery. A dream of falling may reveal your fear of losing control, or it may invite you to let go of what no longer serves. A dream of flying might express your longing for freedom, or it might be showing you the power you already possess but have forgotten how to use. The unconscious speaks in images that bypass the logical mind and penetrate directly to the emotional truth that rational analysis often misses. To understand your dreams is to gain access to an inner advisor of extraordinary wisdom and honesty, one who knows your deepest fears, your greatest potentials, your self-deceptive patterns, and your authentic path forward. This inner guide speaks without the flattery of the ego or the harsh criticism of the superego, but with the profound neutrality of truth itself, showing you exactly what needs to be seen for your continued growth and integration. The dream world operates by its own logic, a logic that reveals the compensatory function Jung discovered at the heart of the psyche's self-regulating system. When your conscious attitude becomes too one-sided, too identified with a particular persona or viewpoint, your dreams will often present the opposite perspective, not to contradict your conscious position, but to restore balance to your psychological wholeness. The person who presents themselves as eternally cheerful may dream of darkness and sorrow. The individual who prides themselves on rational control may encounter wild, chaotic energies in their sleep. This compensatory function extends deeply into your relational patterns and self-concept. If you have been giving your power away in relationships, your dreams may present you as a powerful ruler or warrior, reminding you of your inherent authority. If you have been dominating others, you may dream of being small, vulnerable, or powerless, calling your attention to the empathy and humility your psyche seeks to develop. The unconscious is always working toward wholeness, always presenting what consciousness needs to see for complete integration. Learning to work with your dreams transforms them from random nighttime entertainment into a practical tool for psychological transformation. This work begins with the simple but profound act of paying attention, keeping a dream journal, recording not just the narrative of your dreams, but the emotions they evoke, the symbols that stand out, the associations that arise. As you reflect upon them, each dream is a gift from your unconscious self, and like any gift, it deserves to be received with attention and gratitude. The process of dream interpretation requires a different kind of thinking than what you use in daily life. Rather than analyzing dreams with the linear logic of the conscious mind, you must learn to approach them with what Jung called active imagination, a state of receptive creativity that allows the symbolic content to speak for itself. You do not impose meaning onto dream symbols, but rather enter into dialogue with them, asking what they might represent, what they are trying to communicate, what aspect of your psyche they embody. This dialogue with dream images becomes a form of inner conversation, a way of establishing conscious relationship with the unconscious contents of your psyche. When you dream of a mysterious figure, you can engage with this character through imagination, asking who they are, what they want, what message they bring. When you encounter strange landscapes or surreal situations in dreams, you can explore their symbolic significance by allowing your imagination to elaborate on their meaning, to discover what they reveal about your inner landscape. Active imagination extends beyond dream work into a conscious practice of engaging with the spontaneous images and fantasies that arise from your unconscious. By learning to dialogue with these autonomous contents of your psyche, you develop a relationship with the deeper layers of your being that exist beyond the narrow confines of ego consciousness. This practice allows you to access creative inspiration, psychological insight, and spiritual guidance that emerges from sources deeper than rational thought. The symbols that populate your dreams are not arbitrary, but arise from what Jung called the collective unconscious, the shared repository of human experience that contains the archetypal patterns underlying all human psychology. The wise old man or woman who appears in your dreams carries the archetype of wisdom and guidance. The shadow figure who pursues or threatens you represents disowned aspects of your personality seeking integration. The anima or animus figure who captivates or confuses you embodies the contrasexual element within your psyche that seeks conscious relationship. Understanding these archetypal dimensions of your dreams reveals that your personal psychology is connected to the larger patterns of human experience. Your individual struggles and potentials are expressions of universal themes that have shaped human consciousness throughout history. This recognition brings both humility and empowerment. Humility, because it shows you are part of something much larger than your personal concerns. Empowerment, because it reveals that you have access to the collective wisdom of humanity through your own unconscious depths. The transformational power of dream work becomes evident as you begin to align your conscious intentions with the deeper wisdom revealed in your nocturnal messages. When you understand what your dreams are telling you about your relationships, you can make conscious choices that honor both your authentic needs and the growth opportunities being presented. When you recognize the compensatory messages about your self-worth, you can work consciously to integrate the disowned aspects of your power or vulnerability that seek acknowledgement. This integration process creates what Jung called the transcendent function, the bridge between conscious and unconscious that allows for genuine psychological transformation. As you learn to honor both your conscious goals and your unconscious wisdom, you develop an integrated presence that naturally commands respect because it arises from wholeness rather than pretense, from authenticity rather than adaptation, from inner authority rather than external validation. The dreams that reveal your relational patterns are particularly valuable for understanding why certain dynamics repeatedly appear in your connections with others. The dream where you are invisible may show you how you disappear in relationships to avoid conflict. The dream where you are being chased may reveal your tendency to run from intimacy or commitment. The dream of the unattainable lover may point to your habit of choosing partners who confirm your sense of unworthiness rather than challenging you to claim your value. But dreams do not simply diagnose problems, they also reveal solutions and point toward healing. The dream symbol of a bridge may show you how to connect previously separated aspects of your experience. The appearance of healing figures or sacred spaces in dreams may reveal the inner resources available for your psychological restoration. The dreams of flying or ascending may be showing you potentials for transcendence that exist within your current circumstances. Your dreams also serve as an early warning system, alerting you to psychological dangers or imbalances before they manifest fully in your external life. The recurring nightmare may be highlighting a persistent pattern that requires conscious attention. The anxiety dreams may be revealing stresses that need to be addressed before they overwhelm your capacity to cope. The dreams of loss or endings may be preparing you for necessary transitions that your conscious mind has been avoiding. As you develop fluency in the language of dreams, you begin to recognize that your unconscious is constantly generating creative solutions to the challenges in your life. The breakthrough insight that seems to come from nowhere often has its origins in dream work done weeks or months earlier. The sudden clarity about a difficult relationship situation may be the result of symbolic processing that has been occurring in your sleep. The creative inspiration that emerges unexpectedly often builds on the imaginative work your psyche has been doing in the background. The practice of active imagination allows you to engage consciously with this creative process, to participate deliberately in the ongoing dialogue between conscious and unconscious. By setting aside time for imaginative reflection, for allowing spontaneous images and fantasies to emerge and develop, you create space for the deeper wisdom of your psyche to express itself in your waking life. This practice becomes a form of meditation, a way of accessing inner guidance that complements but does not replace rational planning and decision-making. The integration of dream wisdom into daily life requires a particular kind of courage, the willingness to act on insights that may challenge your familiar patterns and comfort zones. When your dreams reveal that you have been undervaluing yourself in relationships, you must find the strength to speak your truth more boldly. When your nocturnal visions show you potentials for creative expression, you must be willing to risk the vulnerability of bringing those gifts into the world. This courage is supported by the growing trust that develops as you witness the profound accuracy of your unconscious communications. Time and again you discover that your dreams have been preparing you for experiences before they occur, warning you about situations to avoid, or guiding you toward opportunities for growth. This trust in your inner wisdom becomes a foundation for a more authentic and empowered way of living. The transformation that occurs through consistent dream work is subtle but profound. You begin to live from a deeper place within yourself, guided not only by conscious intentions, but by the wisdom of your entire psyche. Your decisions carry more weight because they emerge from wholeness rather than fragmentation. Your presence becomes more compelling because it arises from integration rather than performance. Your relationships deepen because you are relating from your authentic self rather than from adaptive personas. The royal road to the unconscious is always open, every night offering new messages from the depths of your being. These dreams are love letters from your soul to your conscious self, invitations to a deeper dialogue with your own inner wisdom, opportunities to discover the hidden dynamics that shape your experience of life. By learning to receive and decode these messages, you gain access to a source of guidance that is both uniquely personal and universally wise, both intimately yours and connected to the largest patterns of human experience. This inner conversation between conscious and unconscious becomes a lifelong practice, a continuous dialogue that enriches your understanding of yourself and others. Each dream interpreted, each symbol explored, each imaginative dialogue undertaken adds another piece to the complex puzzle of your wholeness, bringing you closer to the integrated presence that naturally commands respect because it emerges from the depths of authentic being. Deep within the fabric of existence runs a thread of paradox so fundamental that ancient philosophers called it the eternal return, the mysterious law by which all things eventually transform into their opposite, by which every extreme position calls forth its counterpart, by which the wheel of experience turns forever between expansion and contraction, light and shadow, rising and falling. Jung named this principle enantiodromia, and in understanding its operation within your own psyche, you discover why every artificial attempt to construct your worth inevitably collapses, while authentic transformation creates the kind of lasting magnetism that draws others to your genuine presence. This is the great cosmic joke that the ego never understands. The harder you grasp for something, the more it slips through your fingers. The more desperately you try to appear worthy, the more your worthiness seems to diminish. The stronger your efforts to control how others perceive you, the more inauthentic you become in their eyes. This is not cruelty, but cosmic law, the same principle that ensures the pendulum swings both ways, that every high tide is followed by low tide, that every dawn emerges from the darkness of night. Watch how this operates in the theater of your daily life. The person who works tirelessly to appear successful often finds themselves feeling increasingly hollow beneath their achievements. The individual who constantly seeks to please others discovers that their people-pleasing eventually breeds resentment rather than appreciation. The one who builds walls to protect their vulnerability finds that these same walls become prisons that separate them from the intimacy they crave. This is enantiodromia in action, the psychological law of compensation that ensures your psyche never remains in one extreme position for long. When any attitude or behavior becomes too one-sided, too rigid, too disconnected from the totality of your being, the unconscious begins to constellate its opposite, creating pressure for balance and wholeness that will eventually break through your conscious defenses. The ancient Chinese understood this principle as the eternal dance between yin and yang, the recognition that within every force lies the seed of its opposite, that expansion and contraction are not enemies but partners in the cosmic dance of existence. The Taoists knew that trying to remain permanently in any single state, whether joy or sorrow, strength or surrender, action or rest, is to fight against the fundamental rhythm of life itself. Your personal psychology operates according to this same principle. The parts of yourself that you have rejected or suppressed do not disappear, but gather strength in the unconscious, eventually emerging with compensatory force to restore balance to your psyche. The anger you have never allowed yourself to feel will eventually erupt. The gentleness you have suppressed in favor of toughness will eventually demand expression. The wildness you have tamed will eventually break free from its civilized constraints. This understanding transforms your relationship to the inevitable cycles of your inner life. Instead of fighting against the natural rhythms of expansion and contraction, instead of panicking when the pendulum begins to swing from confidence to doubt, from clarity to confusion, from connection to solitude, you learn to recognize these movements as necessary and natural aspects of your psychological development. The person who has learned to work with enantiodromia rather than against it develops a different relationship to their own worth and magnetism. They understand that authentic power comes not from maintaining a constant facade of strength, but from being genuine in whatever state they find themselves. They know that true attractiveness emerges not from perfect presentation, but from honest engagement with the full spectrum of human experience. This wisdom reveals why artificial attempts to elevate your worth always backfire. When you try to appear more confident than you feel, more successful than you are, more together than your inner reality reflects, you create an unsustainable tension that the principle of enantiodromia will eventually resolve. The mask will slip, the performance will collapse, the authentic self will emerge, often at the most inconvenient moments in the most public ways. But when you understand this principle, you can work with it rather than against it. Instead of trying to maintain an impossible consistency, you can embrace the natural fluctuations of your inner landscape. Instead of hiding your vulnerabilities, you can acknowledge them as part of your humanity. Instead of pretending to have transcended your struggles, you can be honest about your ongoing journey of growth and discovery. This honesty creates a different kind of magnetism, the attraction of authenticity rather than the allure of perfection. People are drawn to those who are genuine in their complexity rather than those who present simplified versions of themselves. There is something deeply compelling about encountering someone who has made peace with their own contradictions, who can be strong without denying their softness, confident without hiding their uncertainties, successful without pretending they have no struggles. The natural rhythms of your psyche follow the same pattern as the cycles of nature, seasons of growth followed by seasons of rest, periods of outward expansion balanced by times of inward reflection. moments of clarity alternating with phases of confusion and searching. When you fight against these natural cycles, you exhaust yourself trying to maintain spring when your soul needs winter, trying to force growth when your psyche requires fallow time. Learning to surf the waves of enantiodromia rather than being crushed by them requires developing what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold opposing forces in creative tension without immediately resolving them into false unity. This means being able to feel both strong and vulnerable simultaneously, to embrace both your need for connection and your requirement for solitude, to acknowledge both your achievements and your limitations without collapsing into either extreme. This capacity for paradox is what distinguishes psychological maturity from the black and white thinking of the immature ego. The developed personality can contain contradictions without being torn apart by them, can experience the full spectrum of human emotion without being identified with any single feeling, can move between different aspects of their nature without losing their essential center. The principle of enantiodromia also reveals why resistance to change ultimately proves futile. The aspects of yourself or your life that you try to fix permanently in place will eventually be transformed by forces beyond your conscious control. The rigid personas that you construct to protect yourself will eventually crack under the pressure of life's complexity. The narrow identities that you cling to for security will eventually be outgrown by your expanding consciousness. This understanding brings both humility and liberation. Humility because it shows that you are not incomplete. Control of your psychological development, that larger forces are at work shaping your journey of individuation. Liberation because it frees you from the exhausting effort of trying to maintain impossible consistency, from the fear that acknowledging your limitations will diminish your worth, from the belief that growth requires perfection rather than honest engagement with imperfection. The compensatory function of the psyche ensures that whatever you have overdeveloped will eventually be balanced by its opposite, and whatever you have underdeveloped will eventually demand attention. The person who has lived primarily through their intellect will eventually be called to develop their emotional life. The individual who is focused entirely on serving others will eventually need to learn healthy selfishness. The one who has always been the strong one will eventually need to learn how to receive support. These compensatory movements are not punishments but gifts, opportunities for the soul to reclaim its wholeness, to integrate the abandoned aspects of its nature, to develop the full range of human potential. When you understand them as such, you can meet these transitions with curiosity rather than resistance, with gratitude rather than resentment, with excitement rather than fear. The eternal return is not a circle that traps you in endless repetition, but a spiral that carries you deeper into understanding with each revolution. Each time you encounter a familiar challenge, each time you cycle through a known pattern, you have the opportunity to meet it from a more conscious place, to respond with greater wisdom, to integrate the lesson more completely. This is how authentic self-development creates lasting magnetism, not through the construction of an impressive facade, but through the gradual integration of all aspects of your being. As you learn to embrace your contradictions, to honor your natural rhythms, to work with the compensatory movements of your psyche rather than against them, you develop a presence that is both stable and flexible, both grounded and dynamic. People are naturally drawn to this integrated presence because it reflects their own potential for wholeness. In your willingness to be authentically complex, others see permission to embrace their own contradictions. In your ability to move gracefully between different aspects of your nature, they recognize a model for their own psychological development. In your acceptance of the eternal dance between opposing forces, they find inspiration for their own journey toward integration. The principle of enantiodromia teaches you that nothing in the psychological realm is permanent, accept the process of transformation itself. This recognition can initially feel unsettling to the ego, which craves stability and predictability, but eventually it becomes a source of profound freedom. The understanding that no difficult phase will last forever, that no achievement is your final destination, that every ending contains the seeds of a new beginning. This wisdom allows you to hold your experiences more lightly, to be less attached to maintaining any particular state, to find stability not in fixed conditions, but in your capacity to navigate change with grace and awareness. You learn to trust the deeper intelligence of your psyche, which knows exactly what you need for your continued development and will provide it through the natural operation of psychological compensation. The eternal return becomes not a burden, but a blessing. The promise that life will always offer you new opportunities for growth, new chances to integrate abandoned aspects of your nature, new invitations to discover depths of yourself you never knew existed. In understanding and embracing this principle, you align yourself with the fundamental rhythm of existence itself, becoming not a victim of change, but a conscious participant in the eternal dance of transformation. There exists within the human psyche a sacred bridge, invisible to the casual observer, yet more real than any structure built by human hands. This bridge spans the chasm between the known and unknown territories of the self, connecting the daylight realm of consciousness with the starlit depths of the unconscious. Jung called this bridge the transcendent function, and it is perhaps the most profound discovery in the landscape of human transformation. Most souls live their entire lives unaware of this bridge, dwelling exclusively on one side or the other. They remain prisoners of their own divided nature, trapped in the bright but narrow world of conscious thinking, or lost in the murky waters of unconscious feeling. They swing like pendulums between persona and shadow, between what they show, the world, and what they hide from themselves. This oscillation creates a life of perpetual imbalance, where authenticity becomes impossible and genuine presence remains forever elusive. But there comes a moment in the journey of individuation when the soul grows weary of this endless swinging between opposites. The thinking person begins to hunger for the wisdom of feeling. The feeling person yearns for the clarity of thought. The mask wearer grows tired of the performance, while the shadow dweller longs for the light. It is in this moment of exhaustion, with duality, that the transcendent function begins to stir. Imagine consciousness as a vast river flowing from the mountains of awareness toward the ocean of being. Most people navigate this river using only one oar. They paddle frantically with thinking alone, or feeling alone, or intuition alone, or sensation alone. They move in circles, fighting the current, never understanding why they cannot reach the deeper waters where transformation awaits. The transcendent function is the discovery that we possess not one oar, but two, and more importantly, the realization that we can learn to use both in harmony. When Jung first encountered this function, within himself, he described it as a conversation between two voices, the voice of reason and the voice of the unconscious. One spoke in the language of logic, analysis, and conscious understanding. The other whispered in symbols, images, and emotional truths that bypassed rational comprehension. Initially, these voices seemed to contradict each other, creating internal conflict and confusion. But gradually, through patient attention and careful listening, he began to hear something new emerging from their dialogue. A third voice that contained elements of both yet transcended the limitations of either. This third voice is the voice of the transcendent function. It speaks from a place beyond the usual categories of human experience. It is neither purely rational nor purely emotional, neither masculine nor feminine, neither extroverted nor introverted. It emerges from the marriage of opposites within, the psyche, giving birth to possibilities that neither side could generate alone. It is the voice of the integrated self, speaking from the center rather than from the periphery of experience. The activation of this function requires a fundamental shift in how we approach the conflicts within ourselves. Instead of choosing sides in the internal battle between thinking and feeling, consciousness and unconscious, we learn to hold both in a tension that allows something new to emerge. This is not compromise, which weakens both sides, but synthesis, which creates a third option that transcends the original duality. Consider the person who has spent their life identified with their thinking function, viewing themselves as logical, rational, and objective. They have built their identity around their ability to analyze, categorize, and understand. Their feeling function remains unconscious, relegated to the shadow realm where it expresses itself through moods, irritations, and inexplicable attractions or aversions. When such a person encounters a situation that cannot be resolved through thinking alone, a relationship crisis, a career transition, or a spiritual awakening, they often experience what Jung called enantiodromia, a sudden swing to the opposite, extreme. But the transcendent function offers a different path. Instead of abandoning thinking in favor of feeling, or suppressing feeling in service of thinking, it creates a space where both can be present simultaneously. In this space, thinking becomes more nuanced, more sensitive to the emotional truths that logic alone cannot capture. Feeling becomes more articulate, more capable of expressing its wisdom in ways that consciousness can understand and integrate. This integration does not happen overnight. It requires what Jung called holding the tension of opposites, maintaining awareness of conflicting forces within the psyche, without immediately moving to resolve the conflict through choosing one side over the other. This is perhaps one of the most difficult practices in the journey of individuation, for the ego's natural tendency is to seek resolution, to end the discomfort of contradiction by making a choice. But the transcendent function teaches us that some contradictions are not meant to be resolved but transcended. The tension between thinking and feeling, between conscious and unconscious, between persona and shadow, is not a problem to be solved, but a creative force to be harnessed. When we learn to live within this tension without being torn apart by it, we discover that it becomes a source of tremendous energy and creativity. The person who has activated their transcendent function begins to exhibit qualities that seem paradoxical to those still trapped in dualistic thinking. They become simultaneously more rational and more intuitive, more grounded and more visionary, more accepting and more discriminating. They develop what Jung called psychological attitude, a way of being that honors both the objective facts of a situation and the subjective meaning it carries. This psychological attitude manifests in their relationships with others as a kind of natural authority that has nothing to do with dominance or control. People are drawn to them because they sense the presence of someone who has found a way to be authentically themselves without rejecting the validity of others' experiences. They emanate a quality of wholeness that others recognize, even if they cannot name it. In conversations, such individuals display a remarkable ability to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously without losing their center. They can think with their hearts and feel with their minds. They respond to situations from a place of integrated wisdom rather than reactive emotion or cold logic. Their presence itself becomes a bridge that helps others access their own transcendent function. The activation of this function also transforms one's relationship with creativity and problem-solving. Instead of approaching challenges through linear thinking alone or relying solely on emotional impulses, they learn to engage problems from multiple levels of consciousness simultaneously. They might begin with careful analysis, then pause to sense what their body and emotions are telling them, then open to intuitive insights, then return to thinking with this broader perspective. This multidimensional approach often leads to solutions that surprise even themselves, innovations that seem to arise from nowhere yet feel deeply right. These solutions often have a quality of elegance and simplicity that comes from addressing the root of a problem rather than merely its symptoms. They emerge from the creative tension between opposing forces within the psyche. The transcendent function also revolutionizes one's relationship with suffering and conflict. Instead of viewing difficult emotions as problems to be eliminated or obstacles to be overcome, they begin to see them as messengers carrying important information. Pain becomes a teacher, anxiety becomes a guide, anger becomes a source of energy for necessary change. This shift in perspective transforms suffering from something that happens to us into something that happens for us. When external conflicts arise, the person operating from their transcendent function approaches them with a fundamentally different attitude. They seek to understand the underlying dynamics rather than simply choosing sides. They look for the creative potential hidden within, the conflict, the new possibilities that might emerge from the collision of opposing forces. They become skilled at finding the third way, the path that honors the legitimate needs of all parties while transcending the limitations of either position. This capacity for transcendence naturally elevates their perceived value in the eyes of others. People recognize, often unconsciously, that they are in the presence of someone who has found a way to integrate the contradictions that torment most souls. They sense the presence of wholeness, of someone who has learned to dance with paradox rather than being paralyzed by it. The transcendent function also transforms one's relationship with time and mortality. Instead of being trapped in the endless cycle of past regrets and future anxieties, they learn to inhabit the eternal present where all possibilities exist simultaneously. They develop what Jung called prospective attitude, the ability to sense the future potential contained within present circumstances. This temporal transcendence creates a quality of presence that others find magnetic. They seem to carry within themselves access to resources that extend beyond the ordinary limitations of personality and circumstance. They become conduits for something larger than themselves while remaining fully grounded in their individual humanity. The ultimate flowering of the transcendent function is the emergence of what Jung called the transcendent attitude, a way of being that naturally rises above the petty concerns and reactive patterns that govern most human interactions. This is not detachment or spiritual bypassing, but rather a profound engagement with life from a place of integrated wholeness. Such individuals become living bridges between worlds, between conscious and unconscious, between thinking and feeling, between the personal and the transpersonal. They develop the capacity to speak in multiple languages simultaneously, addressing the logical mind while touching the feeling heart, honoring individual needs while serving collective evolution. The transcendent function reveals itself as the secret engine of authentic charisma and natural authority. It is the source of the mysterious quality that makes certain individuals unforgettable, that creates the sense of having encountered something rare and precious. It is the psychological process that transforms ordinary human beings into vessels for the sacred, conduits for the eternal creativity that seeks expression through individual consciousness. In our age of polarization and fragmentation, the transcendent function offers a path beyond the false choices that divide us. It shows us that we need not choose between reason and intuition, between individual fulfillment and collective service, between spiritual depth and practical effectiveness. It reveals that the highest human possibilities emerge not from choosing sides, but from learning to dance with paradox, to live within the creative tension that births new realities. This is the gift of the transcendent function, not the elimination of conflict, but the alchemical transformation of conflict into creative force. It is the discovery that we are not doomed to be prisoners of our own contradictions, but can become conscious collaborators in the eternal process of becoming. Through its activation, we step into our role as co-creators with the universe itself, agents of the ongoing evolution of consciousness, seeking to know itself through the magnificent complexity of human experience. In the grand theater of human consciousness, there exists an archetypal figure who appears at first glance to be the least wise among us, yet who carries within their seeming simplicity the deepest truths of existence. This is the sacred fool, the one who stumbles through life with apparent clumsiness yet somehow arrives at destinations that the clever and calculating never reach. The fool who asks the obvious questions that reveal hidden complexities, who admits ignorance and thereby opens doorways to genuine wisdom, who appears to know nothing yet understands everything that truly matters. Jung recognized in this ancient archetype a profound psychological truth, that our desperate attachment to appearing knowledgeable, successful, and spiritually advanced often becomes the very barrier that prevents us from accessing real wisdom and authentic connection. The more frantically we polish our personas, the more we distance ourselves from the raw, vulnerable humanity that allows genuine intimacy to flourish. The harder we work to impress others with our accomplishments and insights, the more we create an atmosphere of competition and performance that suffocates the tender shoots of authentic relationship. The sacred fool walks a different path entirely. They have discovered, perhaps through painful experience or profound insight, that the mask of expertise is far heavier than the lightness of acknowledged ignorance. They have learned that admitting uncertainty opens more doors than claiming certainty ever could. They understand that vulnerability creates safety, that imperfection invites connection, that the willingness to be seen as foolish often leads to the deepest forms of wisdom. This archetypal wisdom reveals itself in the person who can laugh at their own mistakes without losing their essential dignity, who can admit confusion without feeling diminished, who can acknowledge their limitations without apologizing for their existence. There is something profoundly attractive about such presence. Not the attraction of conquest or acquisition, but the magnetism of freedom, the pull of authenticity, the appeal of someone who has stopped pretending and started living. The fool's journey begins with a recognition that arrives like dawn after a long night of struggle. The understanding that all your efforts to construct an impressive identity have been like building castles in the air, elaborate, exhausting, and ultimately unsustainable. The personas you have carefully crafted, the expertise you have painstakingly accumulated, the spiritual progress you have methodically documented, all of these reveal themselves as weights rather than wings, burdens rather than blessings, prisons rather than pathways to connection. This recognition often comes as a shock to the ego, which has invested enormous energy in maintaining these constructed identities. The professional self that must always have the right answer, the spiritual seeker who must demonstrate their advanced understanding, the successful person who must never show weakness, these personas resist dissolution, clinging to their familiar patterns even when those patterns have become sources of isolation rather than connection. But the sacred fool has learned to hold these identities lightly, to wear them like costumes in a play, rather than treating them as fundamental truths about their nature. They understand that expertise is useful when needed, but toxic when it becomes a requirement for self-worth. They recognize that spiritual insights are valuable when shared authentically, but destructive when used as weapons of superiority. They know that success is meaningful when it serves genuine purpose, but hollow when it exists merely to prop up a fragile ego. The transformation into sacred foolishness is not about becoming ignorant or incompetent, but about releasing the desperate need to appear otherwise. It is about discovering that your worth exists independent of your achievements, that your value transcends your knowledge, that your essential self shines brightest when freed from the burden of constant performance. This liberation creates a kind of presence that others find irresistibly refreshing. The presence of someone who has stopped trying to impress and started simply being. In relationships, the sacred fool becomes a safe harbor where others can dock their own weary ships of performance and competition. People find themselves naturally relaxing in the presence of someone who isn't trying to outshine them, who isn't silently judging their inadequacies, who isn't competing for the title of most successful, most spiritual, or most together. The Fool's presence says, you can be yourself here. Your struggles are welcome. Your imperfections are accepted. Your questions are valued more than your answers. This creates what Jung would recognize as a temenos, a sacred space where transformation can occur naturally without force or agenda. In the presence of the sacred Fool, others feel permission to drop their own masks, to acknowledge their own uncertainties, to explore their own questions without fear of being judged or diminished. This is the secret power of the Fool. They create conditions where authenticity can flourish simply by embodying it themselves. The wisdom of the Fool is often expressed through questions rather than answers, through curiosity rather than certainty, through wonder rather than knowledge. They are the ones who ask why the emperor has no clothes, who inquire about obvious things that everyone else takes for granted, who approach familiar situations with fresh eyes and beginner's mind. This willingness to not know, to remain open, to surprise and discovery, keeps them perpetually available to new learning and deeper understanding. The Fool understands that true wisdom is not about accumulating facts or insights, but about developing the capacity to remain present with whatever is arising. They know that the person who claims to understand everything has actually understood nothing, while the one who admits to understanding very little often possesses profound wisdom about the mysteries that matter most. This is the paradox at the heart of the Fool's wisdom. In acknowledging ignorance, they access intelligence. In admitting confusion, they discover clarity. In embracing uncertainty, they find a deeper kind of certainty. This archetypal energy manifests differently in different individuals, but always with the same underlying quality of unpretentious authenticity. The sacred Fool might be the therapist who admits they don't have all the answers, but offers genuine presence with whatever emerges. They might be the teacher who learns alongside their students, rather than lecturing from a position of supposed superiority. They might be the friend who responds to your struggles not with advice, but with the simple admission that life is complicated and they don't understand it all either. The Fool's approach to spiritual development reveals the limitations of achievement-oriented approaches to consciousness. While others are busy collecting techniques, accumulating insights, and documenting their progress along various paths, the Fool has discovered that the goal is not to arrive somewhere else, but to be fully present where they are. They understand that enlightenment is not a trophy to be won, but a quality of awareness to be embodied, not a destination to reach, but a way of traveling. This understanding frees them from the spiritual materialism that Jung recognized as one of the great obstacles to genuine development. The Fool is not interested in appearing advanced or awakened, but in remaining available to the mystery of existence. They don't need to prove their worth through spiritual achievements or demonstrate their progress through esoteric knowledge. Their spiritual practice becomes not a performance, but a dance, not a conquest, but a surrender, not a climbing, but a deepening. In professional contexts, the sacred Fool brings a quality of presence that transforms competitive environments into collaborative spaces. They are the ones who admit when they don't know something, who ask for help without shame, who acknowledge mistakes without defensiveness. This vulnerability, which the ego fears will lead to diminished respect, actually creates deeper trust and more authentic leadership. People follow the Fool not because they are perfect, but because they are real, not because they have all the answers, but because they are genuinely engaged with the questions. The Fool's relationship to success and failure reflects their deeper understanding of the temporary nature of all external conditions. They can celebrate achievements without being inflated by them, face setbacks without being crushed by them, navigate both praise and criticism with equanimity. This is not indifference, but perspective, the recognition that their essential worth is not determined by external circumstances, that their fundamental value exists independent of the fluctuating fortunes of worldly life. This equanimity creates a kind of magnetic field around the sacred fool that draws others who are weary of the constant pressure to perform, achieve, and prove themselves. In the fool's presence, the exhausted achiever finds permission to rest. The spiritual seeker discovers they can stop seeking and start being. The expert realizes they can admit uncertainty without losing their value. The fool becomes a living reminder that there is another way to be human, a way that doesn't require constant vigilance, endless improvement, or perpetual performance. The transformation into sacred foolishness is not a one-time event, but an ongoing practice of returning to simplicity, authenticity, and presence. It requires the courage to disappoint others' expectations of your expertise, to confess your limitations in a world that rewards the appearance of competence, to remain vulnerable in environments that celebrate armor. This courage is sustained by the growing recognition that authenticity is its own reward, that genuine connection is worth more than impressive reputation, that being real is more valuable than appearing perfect. The fool's wisdom extends to their relationship with time and urgency. While others rush toward their goals with desperate intensity, the fool has learned to move at the pace of natural unfolding. They understand that forcing transformation often prevents it, that trying too hard to grow can inhibit growth, that the most profound changes often occur in moments of relaxed attention rather than effortful striving. This patience is not passivity, but presence, the quality of being fully available to whatever is emerging without needing to control its timing or direction. In the end, the sacred fool's greatest gift is their capacity to reflect back to others their own essential nature, beneath all the constructed identities and performed personalities. In the fool's accepting presence, people remember who they were before they learned to be someone else, reconnect with the authentic self that exists beyond all achievements and failures, rediscover the simple joy of being human without apology or explanation. This is why the fool who appears to know nothing understands everything that truly matters. They have remembered what most of us have forgotten, that our worth is inherent, that our value is unconditional, that our deepest nature is already whole and complete. In embodying this understanding, they become safe spaces where authentic connection can flourish, mirrors that reflect back our own forgotten wholeness, teachers who instruct not through words, but through the radical act of being genuinely themselves. At the end of all journeys lies the beginning. At the culmination of all seeking rests the discovery that what we sought was never absent. The individuated soul stands at this paradoxical threshold, having traveled the vast circumference of their own being, only to arrive at the center they never left. Yet something has changed, not in the essential nature of who they are, but in their relationship to that nature. They have become conscious of their own wholeness. To witness an individuated being is to encounter something both utterly ordinary and mysteriously sacred. They appear as themselves, nothing more and nothing less. Yet this simple authenticity carries a quality that Jung recognized as numinous, a luminosity that seems to emanate from their very presence. It is not the artificial radiance of persona, polished and projected for others' approval, nor the dramatic intensity of shadow erupting in unconscious expressions. It is the steady glow of someone who has learned to inhabit their own soul without apology or pretense. This quality of presence cannot be manufactured or imitated. It emerges only through the slow alchemical process of becoming who one truly is, a process that requires the courage to face every aspect of oneself with unflinching honesty and ultimate compassion. The individuated soul has descended into their own depths, confronted their shadow, integrated their projections, and emerged not as a perfect being, but as a complete one. They have learned the difference between these two states, understanding that perfection seeks to eliminate the unwanted aspects of self, while completeness embraces the totality of what one is. In their presence, others feel a strange permission. Permission to relax the exhausting performance of being someone they are not. The individuated soul's authenticity creates a field of safety where others can glimpse their own hidden wholeness. This is not because the individuated being tries to give this gift. It happens naturally, inevitably, as a consequence of their own integration. Their very existence becomes a silent teaching, a living demonstration that it is possible to be both fully human and genuinely oneself. Watch such a person in conversation, and you will notice something remarkable. They listen from a place of genuine curiosity rather than preparing their response. They speak from their truth without needing to convince others of its validity. They can hold silence without discomfort, allowing space for deeper currents to surface. When they disagree, they do so without rejecting the person who holds a different view. When they agree, it comes from authentic resonance rather than social accommodation. This quality of presence emerges from what Jung called the achievement of the self, not the ego self that struggles for recognition and control, but the capital S. Self that encompasses the totality of conscious and unconscious contents. The individuated soul has learned to serve this larger self rather than the smaller ego, and this shift in allegiance transforms everything about how they move through the world. They no longer need to prove their worth because they have discovered it as an inherent fact rather than an achievement to be earned. They no longer fear rejection because they have learned to reject nothing within themselves. They no longer seek validation from others because they have found the eternal wellspring of validation within their own depths. This does not make them indifferent to others' opinions or feelings, but rather frees them to engage authentically without the desperate undertone of seeking approval or avoiding disapproval. The journey to individuation is never complete in any final sense, for the self continues to unfold throughout life, presenting new challenges, new opportunities for growth, new invitations to become more fully who we are. But the individuated soul has established a different relationship to this ongoing process. Instead of being tossed about by each new challenge, they have learned to dance with change from a center that remains constant. They have discovered what the mystics call the still point, the place within that remains unmoved even as everything around it transforms. This still point is not a place of stagnation, but of dynamic equilibrium. Like the eye of a hurricane, it maintains perfect calm while tremendous forces swirl around it. From this center, the individuated soul can engage fully with life's dramas without being consumed by them. They can feel deeply without being overwhelmed, think clearly without becoming rigid, act decisively without attachment to outcomes. One of the most striking qualities of the individuated soul is their relationship to their own story. Most people are trapped within their personal narrative, unconsciously playing out the same patterns, reactions, and dramas throughout their lives. They are prisoners of their own biography, bound by the roles they learned in childhood, the wounds they suffered, the victories they achieved. The individuated soul has a different relationship to their story. They recognize it as one possible narrative among many, important but not ultimate. This shift in perspective allows them to hold their life story lightly while taking their current moment seriously. They can acknowledge their past without being defined by it, envision their future without being enslaved to it. They live in what Jung called the eternal now, not as an escape from time, but as a way of engaging with time that transcends its usual limitations. In relationships, this quality manifests as a rare combination of intimacy and freedom. The individuated soul can be fully present with others without losing themselves in the relationship. They can love without possessing, support without controlling, engage without merging. Their love comes from fullness rather than emptiness, offering rather than needing. This creates the possibility for what Jung called conscious relationship, connection between two whole beings rather than two halves seeking completion in each other. The individuated soul has also learned to navigate the realm of collective values and expectations with remarkable grace. They are neither rebellious nor conforming, but rather selective in a way that serves their authentic development. They can participate in social structures when doing so supports their growth and service, and they can step outside those structures when they become constraining. They have developed what might be called conscious citizenship, engagement with the collective that maintains individual integrity while contributing to the greater good. This balance between individual authenticity and collective participation creates a unique form of leadership. The individuated soul leads not through force or manipulation, but through example. Their very presence invites others to question their own assumptions, to examine their own patterns, to consider their own possibilities for growth. They become catalysts for consciousness in others, not through preaching or teaching, but simply through being who they are. Their relationship to success and failure has been transformed as well. Having discovered their inherent worth, they no longer depend on external achievements to feel valuable. This paradoxically makes them more effective in their endeavors, as they can pursue their goals without the desperate energy that comes from needing to succeed. They can fail without losing, themselves succeed without becoming inflated. They have learned what Jung called non-attachment to results, full engagement with the process while remaining free from the outcome. The individuated soul has also integrated what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold opposites in creative tension rather than being torn apart by them. They can be both strong and vulnerable, confident and humble, serious and playful. They have learned to dance with paradox rather than being paralyzed by it. This integration of opposites gives them access to the full spectrum of human experience, allowing them to respond to life's varied demands with flexibility and wisdom. Perhaps most remarkably, the individuated soul carries within themselves what Jung called the healing factor. Their presence has a naturally therapeutic effect on others, not because they try to heal or fix, but because their own integration creates a field in which others can access their own healing resources. They become living reminders of human possibility, walking proof that it is possible to be both wounded and whole, both human and divine. This healing presence extends beyond personal relationships into their interaction with the world itself. The individuated soul naturally serves what Jung called the collective unconscious, the shared psychological substrate of humanity. Through their own integration, they contribute to the healing and evolution of consciousness itself. They become agents of what Jung envisioned as the next stage of human development, the emergence of conscious, individuated beings who can participate in collective life without losing their individual essence. The numinous quality that surrounds the individuated soul is not something they project or perform. It arises naturally from their alignment with what Jung called the self, the archetype of wholeness and meaning that exists within every human being. When someone has learned to serve this deeper self rather than the surface ego, they become transparent to a larger life that expresses itself through their individual existence. This transparency does not diminish their humanity. Rather, it reveals the sacred dimension that was always present within their human experience. They become fully themselves and thereby transcend themselves. They achieve what Jung called the paradox of individuation, becoming utterly unique while simultaneously connecting with the universal patterns that unite all life. In our age of confusion and fragmentation, the individuated soul serves a crucial function. They become beacons of integration in a world torn apart by division. They demonstrate that it is possible to embrace complexity without losing coherence, to engage diversity without sacrificing identity, to grow individually while serving collectively. They offer hope that human consciousness can evolve beyond its current limitations while maintaining the precious gift of individual awareness. The ultimate teaching of the individuated soul is not conveyed through words, but through being. Their life becomes a work of art, a unique expression of universal principles, a bridge between the human and the divine. They have discovered the secret that eluded them throughout their long journey of seeking. They were never separate from what they sought. The treasure was always within, waiting not to be found, but to be recognized, not to be achieved, but to be revealed. In recognizing their own inherent wholeness, they give others permission to recognize theirs. In accepting their own contradictions, they create space for others to embrace theirs. In living from their authentic center, they invite others to discover their own. This is the final alchemy of individuation, the transformation of seeking into being, of becoming into recognizing, of earning worth into embodying it. The individuated soul stands as living proof that the journey home to oneself is not only possible, but inevitable for those willing to undertake it with courage, honesty, and compassion. The dawn breaks not once, but endlessly, and in each moment of awakening, the soul discovers itself anew. For those who have walked the spiraling path of individuation, there comes the recognition that the journey never reaches a final destination. It simply deepens, like roots growing toward the center of the earth, like branches reaching toward an infinite sky. Each breakthrough becomes a doorway to yet another mystery, each integration an invitation to embrace an even greater wholeness. This is the eternal dawn, not the ending of darkness, but the endless beginning of light within light. The soul that has tasted its own depths discovers that those depths are bottomless, that consciousness itself is an inexhaustible wellspring that bubbles up from the very source of being. What once seemed like a personal journey of healing and growth reveals itself as participation in something far grander, the ongoing evolution of consciousness itself, seeking to know itself through the magnificent complexity of individual human experience. Those who have walked this path become more than healed individuals. They become conduits for the eternal creative force that Jung recognized as the self with a capital S. They have learned to distinguish between the small self that seeks personal aggrandizement and the larger self that serves the unfolding of consciousness. In making this distinction and choosing to serve the larger, they become agents of transformation for others, not through what they do, but through what they are. Their presence carries the fragrance of authenticity, a quality so rare in our world, of masks and performances that others recognize it immediately, even if they cannot name it. It is the scent of someone who has stopped pretending to be other than what they are, who has ceased the exhausting effort of maintaining a false self for others' approval. In their company, others feel a strange permission to lower their own masks, to breathe more deeply, to remember aspects of themselves they had forgotten or buried. This is not evangelism or teaching in any conventional sense. The transformed soul does not need to preach or convince or convert. Their very existence becomes a silent sermon, a living demonstration that another way of being is possible. They walk through the world as proof that humans can transcend their conditioning without losing their humanity, that we can integrate our shadows without becoming dark, that we can embrace our contradictions without falling apart. Watch such a person navigate conflict, and you witness something remarkable. They do not flee from tension, nor do they create unnecessary drama. They have learned to dance with the dynamic interplay of opposites that Jung called enantiodromia, the tendency of things to transform into their opposites. Instead of being victim to this natural law, they have learned to work with it consciously, using the energy of opposition to generate new possibilities. When others project their unconscious contents onto them, as others inevitably do when encountering someone who has achieved a measure of integration, They neither reject the projections with anger nor accept them with inflation. They have developed what Jung called the capacity to hold projections consciously, serving as temporary containers for others' disowned aspects, while helping those others gradually reclaim what belongs to them. This makes them naturally therapeutic, presences though they may never formally practice therapy. Healing happens around them, not because they try to heal, but because they have learned to be whole themselves. Their wholeness creates a field of possibility in which others can access their own healing resources. They become what Jung envisioned, as wounded healers, not despite their wounds, but because of their conscious relationship to those wounds. The eternal dawn reveals itself through these souls as an endless process of becoming. Each day brings new opportunities to choose authenticity over convenience, depth over surface, truth over comfort. They have learned that individuation is not a destination, but a way of traveling, not an achievement, but a commitment to remaining conscious of the unconscious forces that shape human experience. In relationships, this ongoing commitment to consciousness creates what might be called evolutionary partnership. They engage with others not as completed beings relating to other completed beings, but as conscious participants in the endless dance of becoming. Their relationships become laboratories for growth, sacred spaces where two souls support each other's journey toward greater wholeness. They have learned to love without possessing, to support without controlling, to engage without losing themselves. Their love emerges from fullness rather than emptiness, from choice rather than compulsion. This quality of love naturally elevates those who receive it, not through flattery or false praise, but through being truly seen and accepted in their totality, light and shadow, strength and vulnerability, wisdom and folly. The eternal dawn also reveals itself through their relationship to time. Having learned to inhabit the eternal present, they engage with temporal existence from a place of timeless awareness. They can plan for the future without being enslaved to it, learn from the past without being imprisoned by it. They live in what mystics call the eternal now, not as an escape from time, but as a way of engaging with time that transcends its usual limitations. This temporal transcendence affects everyone around them. In their presence, others feel relief from the chronic anxiety of racing against time, of never having enough time, of time running out. They emanate a quality of enoughness, enough time, enough space, enough presence for whatever is needed in the moment. This creates an atmosphere in which deeper conversations can unfold, authentic connections can be made, creative solutions can emerge. Their relationship to their own mortality has been transformed as well. Having died many symbolic deaths in the course of their individuation, the death of false identities, the death of limiting beliefs, the death of unconscious patterns, they no longer live in terror of physical death. This does not make them reckless or indifferent to life, but rather frees them to live more fully, to take the risks that matter, to speak the truths that need speaking. This freedom from the fear of death paradoxically makes them more alive, more present, more available to the full spectrum of human experience. They can feel their feelings without being overwhelmed by them, think their thoughts without being trapped by them, engage with others without losing themselves in the relationship. They have learned what Jung called the art of living, the capacity to participate fully in existence while maintaining awareness of the eternal dimension that underlies all temporal experience. As carriers of the eternal dawn, they become bridges between worlds, between the personal and the transpersonal, between the human and the divine, between what is and what is possible. They help others recognize that the spiritual dimension is not separate from ordinary life, but woven into its very fabric. They demonstrate that the sacred can be encountered not only in temples and meditation halls, but in the midst of daily existence, in the simple act of being authentically human. Their work in the world often involves what Jung called cultural transformation, the slow, patient work of shifting collective consciousness through individual integration. Each person who achieves a measure of individuation contributes to what Jung envisioned as the gradual evolution of human consciousness itself. They become part of what might be called the evolutionary edge of our species, those who are pioneering new possibilities for what it means to be human. This is perhaps the deepest recognition of the eternal dawn, that personal transformation and collective evolution are not separate processes but aspects of a single movement. As individuals become more conscious, they contribute to the consciousness of the whole. As the collective becomes more conscious, it supports the individuation of its members. The spiral of development moves both inward and outward, both personal and transpersonal, both individual and universal. In our age of unprecedented global challenges, these carriers of the eternal dawn serve a crucial function. They offer living proof that human consciousness can evolve beyond its current limitations, that we can transcend the patterns of unconsciousness that create so much suffering in our world. They demonstrate that it is possible to be both fully individual and deeply connected, both authentically human and genuinely spiritual. Their presence reminds others of forgotten possibilities, of capacities that lie dormant within every human soul. In their company, people remember that they too can grow beyond their conditioning, that they too can integrate their shadows, that they too can serve something larger than their personal ego. They become what Jung called symbols of transformation, living representations of the eternal human potential for conscious evolution. The eternal dawn reveals that the journey of individuation is not a personal achievement, but a gift to the world. Each soul that awakens to its own depths becomes a light that helps others find their way. Each individual who learns to hold consciousness creates space for others to do the same. Each person who chooses authenticity over convenience makes it easier for others to make that same choice. This is the ultimate recognition of those who have walked the Jungian path, that their individual journey toward wholeness was always in service of the collective journey toward consciousness. They understand that their personal healing contributes to the healing of the world, that their individual integration serves the integration of humanity itself. And so the eternal dawn continues, carried forward by each soul that chooses to awaken, to grow, to become more fully who they are. The light passes from one to another, not through preaching or teaching, but through the simple yet profound act of living authentically. In this way, the sacred work of conscious evolution continues through the generations, each dawn bringing new possibilities for what it means to be human, each awakening contributing to the endless flowering of consciousness in the world. The journey never ends because consciousness itself is inexhaustible. The dawn breaks eternal because the light within each soul is connected to the infinite source from which all light emerges. Those who have touched this truth become its servants and its expression, carrying the eternal dawn wherever they go, awakening others simply by being who they truly are. YouTube video description. Discover the profound psychological keys that Carl Jung revealed for authentic transformation and genuine magnetism. This isn't about manipulation or surface-level charisma. It's about the deep inner work that naturally elevates your presence and worth in others' eyes through the simple yet revolutionary act of becoming who you truly are. Jung understood that our desperate attempts to impress others through personas and masks actually diminish our authentic power. The real secret lies in what he called individuation, the courageous journey of integrating your shadow, transcending your conditioning, and awakening to your wholeness. When you stop performing worthiness and start embodying it, when you cease hiding behind carefully crafted personas and begin living from your authentic center, something extraordinary happens. Others are drawn to your genuine humanity rather than your polished performance. This exploration delves into Jung's most transformative concepts: the persona we wear, the shadow we deny, the transcendent function that bridges opposites, and the numinous quality that emerges when we become fully ourselves. You'll discover how personal transformation serves not just individual healing, but collective evolution, how each person who chooses authenticity makes it easier for others to do the same. The journey to psychological wholeness is not about becoming perfect, it's about becoming real. Jung showed us that our greatest magnetism comes not from hiding our vulnerabilities, but from the courage to be genuinely human. This is the eternal dawn of consciousness awakening to itself through your individual journey. What aspects of Jung's teaching resonate most deeply with your own experience of authenticity? Share your reflections below. Your journey matters to the collective awakening. Hashtags: Carl Jung, Jungian psychology, individuation, shadow work, persona and shadow, transcendent function, psychological transformation, authentic self, collective unconscious, conscious evolution.